Hello, everyone. You are welcome to the Safeguarding Resource and Support Hub webinar on establishing and managing effective community and feedback mechanisms. I am Sylvia Nwoko, a communications consultant with the Nigeria Resource and Support Hub. Please be informed that we have available closed captioner and sign language interpreters. You can access the closed caption feature by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. In today's webinar, we will be looking at establishing a community and feedback mechanism, or CFM, as an essential component of safeguarding. You will all agree with me that setting up and managing a CFM that is safe, accessible, and inclusive is not a tick box activity. In this webinar, the speakers will share about how to design effective community feedback mechanisms and also share practical insights in managing these mechanisms. In order to do this, we have invited two wonderful speakers who will talk us through each key part of this webinar. Our first speaker is Oge Chukwudozie. Oge is a safeguarding protection professional with over 15 years experience in the aid sector. She has worked with different organizations, including AfriCare, Christian Aid, and Save the Children. Oge has worked in various thematic areas such as education, HIV/AIDS, livelihoods, nutrition, and emergency response. She is currently the national representative for the Nigeria Resource and Support Hub. Oge's presentation will focus on what community feedback mechanism is, why cross-organizational approach is required, steps for setting up a community feedback mechanism, and maintaining a community feedback mechanism. Our second speaker is Sabina Ogundele. Sabina is an accountability specialist with over 7 years experience in humanitarian accountability to affected people. Her skills cut across setting up and managing accountability systems. She also has core knowledge of multi-donor and multi-sector requirements for accountability to affected populations. Her donor experience includes FCDO, ECHO, FAO, UNICEF, and USAID, while her sector experience includes food security and livelihood, child protection, nutrition, education, and WASH. She has a BSc in economics and a master's degree in disaster and risk management. Sabina is currently an accountability coordinator with Save the Children International. Sabina's presentation today will focus on challenges in maintaining a community feedback mechanism, practical recommendations to overcome these challenges, and examples of common community feedback mechanisms in Nigeria with pros and cons. Before we start, a few points on housekeeping. First of all, you're all on mute with your videos turned off. This is to support with the quality and connection of this webinar. If you have any technical hitches or difficulties, please indicate in the chat and we will be on hand to help you. Please be aware that we will be recording this webinar to share on our website afterwards for anyone who was unable to join us today. Note that your names will not be visible. If during the presentation you would like to ask any questions, please add them to the Q&A function throughout the webinar. You can find the Q&A function in your controls panel at the bottom of your screen. Our speakers will answer your questions at the end of their presentations. You can add new questions or upvote any existing questions, and we will try to cluster them in order to answer as many of them as possible. Kindly resist the temptation to ask your questions in the chat, as they might get overlooked among other chat comments that are not questions directed at the speakers. And with that, it is with great pleasure that I invite our first speaker for today, Oge Chukwudozie.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Yeah, I'm glad to have you all for this our webinar, where we'll be sharing and discussing around effective complaints or community feedback mechanism. So for this webinar, for this section of the webinar, I want to take you to have the overview of what we are discussing around complaints and feedback mechanism, which includes, next slide please, Sylvia. So for the overview, we'll be looking at what is community and feedback mechanism, why is cross-organizational approach required, steps for setting up community feedback mechanism, and maintaining community feedback mechanism. It's important for us to note that different organizations call it different things. Some call it complaints and feedback mechanism. Some refer to it as community-based feedback mechanism. You know, some refer to it as reporting and feedback mechanism. There are different terminologies, but it's all boils to the same thing of how do you get the community members to actually provide feedback or complaints based on, you know, the services you're providing, or based on the attitude of your staff. This is happening in the community because when they get to know what is happening, when they get to know the complaints that people have, then you know, it will be best for them. They will not be able to actually improve the quality of service that they are promoting. The previous slide, Sylvia, not this one. So yeah, so the CSOs will be able to listen to the complaints from community members and respond in a timely and confidential manner. You know, so that means that they will be able to actually improve the quality of the service that they are providing if the CSO is able to really listen and address the complaints that the community members provide. The feedback and complaints mechanism on various topics can come through the CFM, the mechanism you have established, the reporting mechanism you have established. It can also come through your program, services, or procedures, and it can be around fraud or corruption, or it can be on sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. So yes, you don't have to set up different reporting channels for different issues. You don't have to say, you know, this one is only for program related activities, and then this one is for sexual exploitation activities. This one is for fraud, because that will cause confusion in the community. But rather, you have a system that people can just walk to you and report anything they have. It might even be that, you know, they want to find out why they are not part of the group that we are selected. Of course, we know that in NGO, in the work we do, we don't target every member of the community. We have our selection criteria where we identify people who fit into the criteria, you know, of program participants will want to reach out. So some people in the community might feel, oh, I'm not part of this. I want to know why. And then they have that right to come to your mechanism, and drop they might be in a suggestion box. They will drop that question, or they might meet your staff and ask. Those are still part of feedback mechanism. And then with that, you'll be able to now know that you need to maybe sensitize more so that people understand why you are choosing those that you choose. So, and then if again, it's something around sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, then it should also be confidential enough for people to move in, relay the complaints, be it by whatever means that you have, suggestion box, or they have somebody to talk to, or whatever means, then, or it might be phone call, it might be email, whatever it is that you have available that is, accessible and safe for the members of that community. So that is it. Complaints mechanism, will be something, one, mechanism as it is. We have various channels on, they can be, to cover all these issues. You wouldn't say the complaints box is only for questions, and then the phone call is only for sexual exploitation. And that is not how it is. But all of them, you can receive all these varying types of feedback or complaints. A CFM includes a range of safe, accessible, and appropriate channels for community members. This is actually very important. You cannot overemphasize. I keep saying it has to be safe. So the complaints mechanism has to be safe. So what do we mean by being safe? That anybody, people can come in and report without the fear of being found out. Some of them might want to be anonymous reports, and so they shouldn't fear that they will be found out and stigmatized. Even if the person is providing the name, that person should also be protected. It should be safe. Even for children, is it safe for children to come in and be able to report? Is it accessible? If you have like only suggestion boxes, that means that complaints mechanism will not be accessible for people who cannot read and write. It's not accessible, and then again, you have to also check accessibility for other minority groups, like persons with disability. Is this thing that you have there, whatever it is it accessible to minority groups like persons with disability, or like, those who are not maybe from that area, but still want to report something that is happening in that community. And of course, it has to be something that cuts across different categories of the community. Yes, let's move on. So setting up a complaints feedback mechanism requires a cross-organizational approach. And why is it important to have a cross-organizational approach? First, is something that everybody's input is needed. You cannot have a complaints mechanism where that is managed only by the male team, and then the program team will be like, oh no, that is actually, the M&E people, it doesn't concern us. Sometimes in NGO, we have those segregations, oh, the M&E, no, it's their responsibility. But it's something, or the finance will feel, oh, well, it's the program people's cup of tea, it doesn't concern us. No, rather, complex mechanism should be, by everyone. Everyone needs to be involved in that, because as you're setting up even for the community, you're also setting up, for the organization, and everybody has a role. The finance, for example, need to make sure that the budget is available for it. And provide, when the program staff asks for funds for these activities, then they should be able to release the funds, and also know that there might be reports around finance and fraud. So everybody needs to be involved. So some of the groups that, really needs to be involved in setting up a complaints feedback mechanism includes the program team. So the program team, of course, is important. These activities are within the complaints mechanism is within program activities. So it's important that the program people understand, what is there, and understand that any one of them can actually be approached by a community member to report Then monitoring and evaluation activities, sometimes it's called MEL, sometimes it's called MEAL, monitoring, evaluation, accountability, learning, whatever it is, or sometimes it's just M&E, monitoring and evaluation, whatever it is your organization call it. It's important that the M&E team or the MEL team is also part of setting up the complaints mechanism. Sometimes in some organizations, the accountability system, the complaints and feedback system is embedded in the MEL unit. So the accountability officer is part of the MEL unit, and make sure that they will review all the complaints that come in, and then try to assign it to the appropriate persons to respond to, and then report on it. Community engagement efforts. It's important to ensure that the community engagement efforts, that's some call it community mobilization. So when you have community mobilization staff, it's important that as they are going to the community, they are sensitizing the staff around complaints and feedback mechanism. Partners, you work with partners. So staff that is involved in partnership. Sometimes organizations have, partnership advisor, program partner advisor, or some kind of that position, or even if it's not a clear cut, sometimes, it's the program people are part of, that partnership relationship. So it's important that those working with also understand and feedback mechanism and also ways of working. I've talked about financial and audit procedures, human resource procedures. It's important too that as human resource persons in the organization, that they are also part of the complaints mechanism and understand, because eventually when reports come in, it might be around staff, and then the human resource will be faced with the responsibility of pulling out the policies, and then making sure that being part of the panel that will look at whether there was actually a breach of the organization's procedures, and then the disciplinary action that will guide that. So it's important that the HR is part of that. Let's have the next slide. Now let's quickly look at 10 steps to setting up a complaints and feedback mechanism. We call it, we have this in our how to notes, the steps to set up complaints and feedback mechanism. The first one is really to secure leadership commitments. We cannot have a complaints mechanism that is effective without the leader being involved. That commitment is important because it has to do a lot with resources, with funding, and even with responding to the complaints that come in. So if the leader is not involved, is not committed, then that will not work. Agree on internal process for handling reports when they come in. So you are looking at, who is responsible. Like I've mentioned, the HR, we need to be there to ensure that, if a report comes in and it's against a breach of the organizational policy and conduct, then the disciplinary actions will need to be taken. So sometimes organizations set up a committee made up of different, units, like maybe the top management, the HR, the safeguarding person, if it's a different position, and all that. So it's important to agree on this, to identify who will be responsible. How will you support the survivors? When there is a report, how will the survivors be supported? Do you have funds set aside to respond to the survivors? Who will analyze reports? Who will feedback? It's important that when we are actually doing the complaints mechanism, getting feedback back to the organization, back to the community, or back to the person, the complainant, it's very important. We are going to be talking about, Sabina will talk about it more around challenges we have. Yes, so, but it's important that all these things are identified. You identify who will feedback. Will it be the safeguarding focal person? Will it be who? Will it be top management that will feed back to the complainants? So once you agree on these internal procedures for handling, then you come to the mapping. So you complete a mapping and quality check of local support services and gaps. So here now you're identifying the services that are available around your location that can actually support if you receive any complaints. So be it like health issues and psychosocial support, whatever kind of support that the survivor might need, you need to identify, if there are also other needed support services that like education or some other forms of support that might be needed. It's important that you map this out, map out the service providers, have a relationship with them so that once reports come in, it will be easy for you now because you've already established that relationship. Yes, so let's have the next slide. Now, the next one is to train staff to receive reports and report in line with agreed internal processes. Like I mentioned, anybody, any of your staff, even volunteers, can be approached by a community member to report a case. So when such a person receives that report, what will the person do with it? So it's important that all staff know their responsibility. You have this clear process, which we've identified earlier on, those are internal processes. Okay, so if anybody receives a report, this is the person that you report to. So if it's a volunteer that received, because a community member might decide to report to a volunteer who is closest to them. So that volunteer will know that, look, I need to move this to the safeguarding focal person or the HR manager or the state team lead. Or if all these people are the ones that are being reported, then maybe it has to go to the executive director. So it's important that these channels are identified and clear and everybody understands. If possible, have it as IEC materials in your offices, share handbills on it so that everybody is clear. Because again, we'll be talking about challenges. Confidentiality is critical. When this volunteer receives it, this volunteer doesn't need to go telling every other single person, all the other volunteers about this report, but rather should be able to take it straight to the right channel. Yeah, and then down the next one is about understanding how other CSOs working in the same area are seeking and acting on complaints and reports. It's important, we all work in a community. We all like network in this our NGO work. It's important that we network and collaborate. So it's important to, in complaints and feedback mechanism, to understand what others are doing. And then, if possible, it's actually recommended that you can have joint CFM. So that if we are all working in this community A, you can have one CFM if all the organizations agree. So that instead of different people having different CFM and then it's confusing to the beneficiaries, they have one. It might be several types. We're still going to look at the channels, but we know that this is centrally managed. Maybe the different participating organizations might identify like a committee representing different organizations, that are part of it to handle that. But where this is not possible, it's still fine. Sometimes, that collaboration might not work because of funding, purposes. Maybe the donors are different. So in that case, yes, it's fine, but it's important that you still, identify with other organizations so that if there is a complaint against them, then you will be able to know how to report that. Because sometimes, your organization might be the one that, you are doing all the right things, the beneficiaries like, your mode of approach, and they're comfortable with your program and your staff and volunteers. And then in that instance, they might now want to come in and report another organization to you. So when that report comes in, you don't have to just, do that. No, this is not about your organization. It doesn't concern you. No, you still have that responsibility to handle it. So at least you take it down to the topmost person in the organization, which you must have identified relationship with because you're all working in that area. And then they can now follow their internal procedures to handle that. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, the other one is now to explain to the affected population that CSO staff and programs should not cause SEA, that's sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, or other harm. So you let the community members know, you let the program participants know, you let your target population know that, look, these are the inappropriate behaviors. Nobody should ask you for money to register you. Nobody should ask you for sex or any other thing to register. No, this is, have IEC materials, tick for inappropriate behaviors, mark X, for appropriate behaviors, mark tick, good, so that it's even okay. People that are low literate can, identify with it and understand. So it's important that you continue to sensitize people on that, because sometimes it doesn't come so free for them to report, because they feel, oh, okay, this organization is already doing all this lot for us. So, well, if they're asking for maybe some 5,000 naira just to get us registered, it's okay. I can borrow from some of my friends and family to be able to pay them. But when they know that this is not right, and then you continue to sensitize them on that, then they will begin to understand that, look, this person that is asking for this money is not really what the organization is, is acting outside of the organization, and then they can have that trust to report. Now, the next is about consulting with different members of the affected community and how they would like to report. So this is actually major again. Sometimes we just set up suggestion boxes, maybe because it's a bit easier, or we say we'll have phone lines, for people to report, without asking the community what they really would like, how they really like to report cases. If you are setting up suggestion boxes where majority of the people you serve in that community cannot read and write, then who will use the suggestion box? If you're having a phone line where a majority of the people there cannot afford a phone, then how would they report? So it's important that you work with the community to identify what they would prefer best on how to report. And then, of course, you are looking at us also the languages, the existing community mechanisms. It might be that they want to even utilize their own systems. Why can't they utilize their own internal systems if that's what they want, their community reporting systems? And then you liaise with the community leader, or so you should also explore these things. And then of course, know that language is important. If they are using phone calls, the receivers don't know how to speak all the languages in that location. And then also understand reasons why different groups or individuals might not report. Sometimes men will not want to report. They feel that, well, no, as a man, I shouldn't be complaining of things. That word complain. There was an exercise we did sometime, and then we found out that the men really would prefer not to report. So that way, or persons with disability or other minority groups, maybe women in that community or some other groups, while children, so you explore all these things to ensure that whatever system you have is something that will at least meet the different needs of the community, knowing that it's not homogeneous. Let's go to the next slide. So the final 3 steps is to decide how to appropriately feedback to the community on your reports. So you decide again, how do you feedback to the community? It's always difficult closing the loop, but that is the best practice. You have to feedback to the person. So you have to agree on the time, what time frame would such a person require to expect a feedback from you. So where there is investigation, where there is no investigation, because sometimes not all of them that will require investigation. Some might be straightforward answers. Like if somebody is asking for why they are not part of the beneficiaries, then the program person can easily provide that information. So it's always important, but when there is investigation too, it's important that you have an estimated time of when the report will be fed back, or the information will be fed back to the complainant to close the loop. Then set up your channels. So at this point, you set up your channels, and then you consider appropriate channels for SEER that are safe and confidential. And then, of course, you continue to raise awareness with the affected population about your CFM. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. So these 6 steps here are a way for you to continue to maintain your feedback mechanism. Once you set up the feedback mechanism, it's not all. You know, you see our last point was you continue to sensitize. So we set up feedback mechanism, you need to maintain it. And then that's by like ensuring immediate and appropriate response. When a complaint comes in, have to swing into action, you know, to ensure that the response is provided. That's why it's important to have already done your background work and mapped out the service provider so that you can easily, you know, refer appropriately, and identify with organizations who are doing similar work, and then you will refer when there is need for case conference in terms of your case handling process, then that can also be part of your response. Follow a clear case handling process that is survivor-centered, including referral pathway based on services maps. So you have a clear case handling process. That is how the case will be handled or managed. So, so if it's a SEER case, do you need to report to police? Do you need medical care? Do you need psychosocial support? You know, so follow that. Sometimes it might be that you need staff who are knowledgeable on this to be able to provide that. And then, of course, follow referral pathway. You must have, you know, done your service mapping and identified how you will refer. And on that, you can refer based on the services that you've mapped. Continue to raise awareness is important. And sometimes, you know, you have this report mechanism and you are not receiving reports and you are happy. No, it doesn't work like that. So you continue to raise awareness. You maintain confidentiality and protect the data of all cases. And that's why it's important to have that internal procedure where everybody will understand what's, you know, their role, so that that volunteer who received that report will know who to report to and not go around be discussing it amongst other people. Regularly ask different groups if the CFM is fit for purpose, you know, especially if the reporting is low. You know, you need to constantly ask them. Then you adapt and establish new channels. You know, like I was saying, you need to constantly, you know, find out how this is going on with them. If the reporting is low, don't be happy and say, oh no, so that means, you know, nothing is happening in this our program, everything is fine. It might not be, it might be that the people are still not confident to report, or it might be that they are being threatened to report. So it's always better to, in fact, it's important that you even you have high numbers of reports. That's to show that your reporting mechanism is effective. When you have high reports, then it's effective, and then ultimately, you know, it will now continue to now lead to reduction of SEER and other harm. But when you don't have any reports, we set up these systems and then nothing is working, you have to constantly check yourself. You have to constantly use or utilize other means, your program meetings with the community meetings and all that. Utilize different means to have different focus group discussions with different groups to find out what is happening in that community. And then with that, you know, you continue to build their confidence to report. And then, of course, document and share lessons, you know, yeah, especially like amongst the most used channels, you learn from that and know how to continue to move on. Thank you. Let me hand back to the chair. I think that's the last slide for me.
Thank you so very much, dear Oge, for that very educative and wonderful presentation. You really, truly, you know, explained all the necessary steps to take in setting up a complaints and feedback mechanism. And I particularly liked the cross-organizational approach. And now it's an honor to hand over to our second speaker for today, Sabina Ogundele.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Without any waste of time, I would run through the overview of what we'll be looking at in the next few minutes. We'll be looking at the challenges in maintaining a community feedback mechanism. We'll also look at practical recommendations to overcome these challenges. And we'll see examples of common CFM in Nigeria with the pros and cons. Next slide, please. Okay, you would notice that while Oge was speaking, she emphasized a lot on confidentiality. One of the issues in maintaining an effective CFM is ensuring confidentiality of feedback and complaints. Confidentiality from the point of reporting, that is the person who is reporting the complaint or raising the issue, or the whistleblower, as it may be called in other organizations, and to the point of documentation and handling of such complaints or feedback. We need to ensure that the person who reported this concern doesn't go about discussing with everybody saying, oh, I reported that Mr. So-so-and-so was abusing so-so-and-so, or I reported that. So like I was saying, confidentiality in ensuring that the person who reported doesn't go about discussing the issue or the concern that he or she has raised. The person who is documenting or handling this feedback also must treat such feedback with utmost confidentiality and being discreet about the whole issue. I must mention that confidentiality doesn't mean I will not tell anybody. However, feedback or complaints will be treated only on the case that this person needs to be involved in managing this kind of issue. So we don't have to make a feedback or complaint a thing of public discussion. Only those who need to be involved in managing that issue should be informed about the case. And this also should be explained to the person providing the feedback. So they don't think that, oh, you told me that this is going to be confidential. How come Mr. A and B are the people contacting me now? They need to know that, yes, it's going to be treated confidentially. However, this group of people are the ones that will be managing this kind of feedback. So they need to be informed on this issue. We cannot overemphasize this issue of confidentiality because it goes to protect the person reporting. It goes to protect the victim of concern, and also the alleged person. We encourage people to report even when they are not sure. If they just suspect that this is a thing of a fraud case or a case of sexual exploitation or abuse. So once they just suspect, they are to report. So it might not even be actually true, but until that is proven or disproved, we need to protect the reporter, we need to protect the victim, and we need to protect the alleged person also. Then another thing is transparency issue. Oge mentioned a lot that people need to be aware of the behaviors of staff. People need to be aware that staff, for instance, or other people should not trade assistance for sex, assistance for money, or other forms of abuse. And we need to be very clear on the mechanisms that are available, how to use them, expected behavior, turnaround time, when feedback is expected to be gotten, and the rights of the people to share feedback and complaints. Because it's one thing for us to have mechanisms in place, and people don't know they have the right to use those mechanisms. For instance, during an assessment, we asked a group of people why are they aware of their mechanisms available, and they said yes. Oh yes, they are. Okay, have you used them? And they said no. Why don't you use them? They said we think that this mechanism is for only this group of people or only that group of people. Another instance was when we set up a mechanism for the whole community, and the adults will drive away the children and say, no, this is not for you. So we had to go back to explain to these people that, no, this mechanism is for everybody. And so we had to divide the days that for adults and for children, so that it is clear that everyone has a right to share feedback and complaints. And I think these rights are also embedded in the CHS standards 4 and 5, which is our guiding principles in the aid sector. So we need to be very clear on the things that people should expect from organizations, from community members, and their rights also, towards themselves. Then there's an issue of lack of trust. Sometimes people don't use mechanisms we establish because they don't trust the system, or they don't trust the people who are handling the mechanisms. We've had several reports of people saying, this person, even when we tell him our concerns, they don't do anything about it, or they don't take it up to the organization, or we don't share our feedback with the organization because we don't think the organization will do anything about it. So if people don't have trust in the system, then they will not use the mechanisms, no matter how beautifully structured these mechanisms are. Okay. Also, we have safety issues. Again, her presentation mentioned that mechanisms that we set up have to be safe for people to be able to use. It shouldn't put them or expose them to more harm. The location of where the mechanism is has to be such that people feel comfortable to use these mechanisms. So we cannot overemphasize the fact that we need to consult with community members on whether the locations for setting up our help desks, or setting up a booth, or placing our suggestion boxes are safe for the people. It could be the place that when they go, they are exposed to abuse, they are molested, or they are harassed by people. So we need to ensure that these mechanisms are safe. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we also have issue of inclusion and accessibility. Are our mechanisms accessible to all the groups of people in the community? Are they suitable to people of different age, to people of different race, gender, disability? Because we can set up beautiful mechanisms and only a particular group of men, or only a particular group of women, or only a particular tribe in that community are able to access such mechanisms. Or we can set up, say, recording booths, and people with wheelchairs, people who are blind, cannot access these mechanisms. So we need to look within and check to see that we include everybody, different groups of people with different abilities in the community. Another challenge in maintaining a CFM is the issue of human and financial resources. Sometimes, if accountability is not, or CFM is not appropriately budgeted for from the beginning of the project, or if the project funds are not flexible, then we'll have challenge of getting the right people to manage these mechanisms, or having the financial resources to establish the required mechanisms. For instance, we can say, we've budgeted like 500,000, just for instance, to set up suggestion boxes. And we go to the community, we do our assessments, and suggestion boxes are not ideal for everyone. Maybe only a small group of people can use the suggestion boxes, but that fund is not going to be sufficient to set up other mechanisms that are ideal for the larger populace. This is a constraint in maintaining our feedback mechanisms, and it needs to be looked into. So another very big concern that we have in maintaining feedback mechanism is closing the feedback loop. And this has ripple effects on other areas of the feedback mechanism. This involves ensuring that response is provided to the person who raised concern. the time it takes to provide a response should be communicated to that person. Not just the time, the method through which that response will be provided. Sometimes we have a challenge of investigations taking a longer period than it should be. So for instance, you tell the person that, oh, we should get back to you in a month. And in a month, the investigations on that case is not done. It's not conclusive. It is ideal to go back to that person or that community and let them know that, okay, we told you we'd get back to you in a month. For now, we have not been able to conclude on the case because we have constraints or for ABCD reasons. However, we are still working on it. And by so and so time, we should get back to you. So at every point of time, we should try to communicate with the person who reported the concern. Again, there's another challenge of closing the feedback loop when the concern is reported anonymously and there's nobody to get back to. In that case, we can get back to the community and tell them the issue, a general information that a concern of this nature was raised without details, of course, if it is sensitive, if the complaint is sensitive. So we have this issue. We're not able to get directly to the person who raised the concern. However, we are looking into it, or it has been concluded and the staff or person in question has been suspended, or whatever it is, whatever the outcome of the investigation or the process is, we should let the community know. That helps to boost their confidence in the system. That helps to make them trust the system. Then they know that if there is any concern, the system will handle it and will get back to them. I've had an issue where somebody raised the concern and for some reason, I think we couldn't contact him for a long time. By the time we got back to him, he said, oh, I thought that you were not even going to do anything about it. I had almost forgotten about the case. I thought we just report just for reporting's sake. And I had to apologize and say, we're sorry, we've been trying to reach you for a while now, but we have been constrained. But so far, this is what we have done, and this is what we have done. And at the end of the whole process, the person actually acknowledged that he was already losing, faith in the system. But we getting back to him and updating him on all that has happened has really made him believe that, yes, the system is working and the system is truly transparent in its dealings. Okay. So we have another concern of social and customary norms or power imbalance. This is a situation where people feel like, oh, I'm a man, I should not be complaining. Or people say, you're giving us assistance, so why should we say that you're not doing it right? Or why should we say that your behaviors are inappropriate? Or we have cases where the custom of the place forbids people to talk about sexual exploitations and abuse, for instance. Or people are scared to say, oh, this is the person who is doing, the person is highly placed in the community, or the person is an NGO staff. So we are afraid or we don't feel comfortable reporting. All of these issues excuse me, are constraints or challenges in maintaining an effective CFM. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have other challenges also, which, can we just go back one step? Other challenges such as connectivity issues, insecurity, improper documentation of feedback that also, limit or constraint providing feedback or handling the feedback properly. Because if you don't have proper documentation, then you may not have all the information you require to act on that feedback. And if it is an anonymous feedback that you can't get back to the person, then that feedback ends there. And sometimes there are also issues of connectivity. Say the person reports through a toll-free line, and that is the only contact that you have for the person, and you keep on trying to get back to that person for one reason or the other, you're not able to get through. So these are some other things some of the challenges. So we have a couple of recommendations to overcome these challenges. One is to ensure that mechanisms encourage confidential reporting. We should have different types of mechanisms, such as suggestion boxes, toll-free line, emails, different mechanisms that can be available for people to report confidentially without any fear of being known or their identities being exposed. We also need to have ensure that there are dedicated staff responsible for handling feedback in line with standard operating procedure. Oge emphasized during her presentation that we need to have a standard operating procedure on who does what and who does what, how long will it take, to handle different levels of complaints and to provide feedback. So we need to ensure that these things are clearly spelled out and everybody knows his or her responsibilities. And also these people are trained to treat on the management of complaints so that they ensure that feedback and complaints they receive are managed properly and in a confidential manner also. Also, any database that feedback will be stored, we need to ensure that it is encrypted or locked with password so that not everybody has access to it. That way, we ensure that feedback is confidential. Then we need to also consider intersectionality as Oge emphasized. Everybody has a role to play in managing feedback, so we need to ensure that different groups of people are involved from the setting up of the feedback. We need to consult with boys and girls, women and men, people with disability, different groups of people. We need to consult with people within the organization also on the mechanisms to set up and where these mechanisms should be, where it's safe for them. Okay. We also need to ensure that feedback and complaints are acknowledged and responses provided to communities, and whether or not the issue raised can be addressed or not. Sometimes the things that people request for or report are not within the confines of the organization, and whether or not we're able to resolve that, we have an obligation to respond to whoever raised that concern and tell them, oh, sorry, we can't do this because of ABCD reasons, or this is the point we have gone, or these are the things that we are doing based on the feedback that you have provided. We need to plan for CFM and include budgets in proposals. We need to ensure that once organization commitment is secured, we need to ensure that every proposal that we're designing, every project should have a budget for the CFM. We should have a plan. We should be able to spell out who is going to do what and what we intend to do in terms of CFM for that project so that it is properly budgeted for. We need to also constantly review our CFMs, as Oge mentioned earlier. We need to check to see who is reporting through these channels. Are they effective? What are the challenges? We shouldn't just fold our hands and say, oh, we're not getting feedback, it means everything is going well. No, we need to be proactive in terms of getting feedback, because where everything is silent, it may be a sign of danger. So we need to constantly review our mechanisms, check the effectiveness, and make the necessary changes that we need to, if there's a need for. Next slide, please. So here we have different feedback channels, which we can use in our communities depending on the preference of different groups of people. We have the phone lines, we have suggestion boxes, we have help desks with different advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages of the phone line is that you're directly in contact with someone from the organization. Okay, and it provides anonymous or confidential means of reporting. It is easy to use, and response is directly. You ask a question or you have any concern you raise, you get a direct response straight to you. Okay, and so some of the limitations of the phone line is it's limited by network connectivity, and it may be overwhelmed in a situation where it's not for just a particular project. There might be several calls coming in at the same time, and people's calls may be missed. There may be delay in response if the people in the contact center do not have enough information about what you're asking to respond to you. They'll have to get back to the program's people or whoever is responsible, and this may cause a delay in response. And it's also limited to people who have phones or who can afford to recharge their phones and so on. So for suggestion boxes also, we have the pros and cons. As providing a private and confidential means you can write about anything at all in any language that you want to write, and it's readily available because it's in the communities from morning till night. And it has the disadvantage of limited literacy level. You have to be able to read or to write before you can use it. It is not ideal for urgent feedback, because I know that most times for the suggestion boxes, there's a period, say 2 days or 1 week, when the contents are retrieved, and then before feedback is being provided. So if you have an urgent need, that will not be ideal for that. And another disadvantage is what you write could be misinterpreted. If what you wrote is not clear, or if there's not someone who understands that language properly, it could be misinterpreted. And limited by trust and confidence of the persons opening the box. If people are not comfortable with the people opening the box, they will not use the suggestion box. We also have the help desk, where people go to get information or share feedback and complaints face to face. It's easily accessible, and then you get a faster response because people who are there will have more information on the programs and are directly in the community with you also. Some disadvantages of that is it's not private because it's mostly in an open space, and it may not be readily available since it is manned by staff or volunteers who have a time frame of work. It could be only available, say, in the morning or from morning till a particular time. And also weather could also be a factor limiting it, and other factors like disease or outbreak. Next slide, please. We also have the voice recorder, which is easy to use, which is private and confidential, where you can lay complaints in any language, and it's readily available since it's in the community for most of the time. And the cons of this is that complaints may be misinterpreted because someone has to listen to your complaint and then interpret it. If insufficient information to provide response, if the person using the voice recorder doesn't provide enough information about the person, then providing response will be difficult and you cannot make further clarifications. Then we also have community committee or beneficiary reference groups. These are a group of people in the community who are responsible for managing feedback and complaints. They're readily in the community. Complaints can be in any language, and then it encourages community participation. But the downside of this is it could lead to power imbalance. We've had cases where people that are supposed to be supporting in managing feedback and complaints become like, start to make themselves feel like they have some extra power because they have a direct link with the organization. It may not be private and confidential. These are community-based people, so people may not feel very confident in sharing their feedback with them, as they feel like what they discuss with these people, they can discuss with other members of the community since they know who they are. And there's a possibility of bias in presenting and handling complaints. Then we also have other one-on-one face-to-face with program organization staff representatives, program staff who are daily on the field, have interactions with people. It is readily available and it's faster for response or referral, since these are the program teams and they know their colleagues in other organizations. It's usually faster for them to quickly say, oh, we don't provide this service, but we'll refer to point A, or you can go to community B where the service is provided. And most times complaints are not documented. Most times the feedback that is gotten from this program staff are mostly lost on the field. We also have the emails, which is readily available, private and confidential, but is limited by literacy level and availability of network or internet facility. So we also have the FGDs and the PDMs. The advantage of that is that it is specific feedback and the feedback is guided. It could be something that the community have not even thought about, that the organization will be asking of. So it gives you an avenue to discuss on issues or areas that you may not have, the community may not have thought of raising concerns in those areas. And it is easier for management to take decision because it is a specific thing that we want to find out, or the organization wants to find out about. So already they know that once we have feedback on this, then this is the direction we want to take, for instance. And the cons of this is because it's a proactive channel and it's a public channel. Whatever you want to say is guided. So there are specific types of feedback that you are to provide. There are specific questions which you are to respond to. And then it's also public, so it may not be an ideal situation for you to share anything that needs to be treated confidentially. I must say this is not an exhaustive list of the pros and cons. There's so much more advantages and disadvantages than we have listed here. However, there's not one channel that doesn't have an advantage or disadvantage. So it is advised to have multiple channels, mostly a mix of reactive and proactive channels. So the reactive channels are those channels where are readily available in the communities and community members can use at any time. While proactive channels are those channels where we have to go out to deliberately seek for feedback in specific areas. And this is to ensure that we meet the needs of different people with different categories of people in the community. Okay. So in conclusion, we cannot overemphasize, like I've been saying earlier, the need for a functional CFM. The benefits are enormous if it is done properly. And most of all, it supports us to build a respectful and collaborative relationship, as well as facilitates a safe environment for the people that we work with. Thank you.
Our dear participants, that's all we have time for today. Unfortunately, our speakers will be unable to answer your questions live. However, your questions have been answered in the text response function of the Q&A. In addition, all your questions and the speakers' responses will be a part of the resources in our webinar follow-up email to you. Thanks so very much once again to Oge Chukwudozie and Sabina Ogundele for their informative presentations, and to all of you for your challenging questions. We will be sharing a poll with you now. We are so grateful if you can complete it, as it helps to tailor our services to suit you and continue to improve the events we deliver. The poll should be up on your screens at this moment. There are about 5 questions. Just kindly click on the correct responses, and at the end of it, kindly click on the submit button. Also, note that we will be sharing this webinar recording and slides to you in a few days, as well as other related resources. If you want to hear about future RSH webinars, subscribe to our newsletter. The link is in the chat. Thank you and hope to connect with you again soon. Bye for now.